Picture this: a door at the bottom of the ocean that nobody dared to open since 1956. And now, after all these years, it finally cracked open. For decades, cameras avoided this section. Not because explorers weren't interested, but because nobody knew what was hiding behind this forgotten passage inside the SS Andrea Doria. This wasn't just any ship. This was a floating palace that carried secrets down to the ocean floor. Secrets that have been sleeping in the dark for over 60 years. Why would a simple door, nothing special about it, stay untouched for more than 6 decades? What was behind it that even the bravest divers chose to leave alone? What made them swim right past it, again and again, as if something invisible was telling them to keep moving? The images you're about to see have never been shown before. The crew corridor, exactly how it looked on the night the ship went down. This is the first time anyone outside a small group of researchers has laid eyes on what's really down there. These aren't the fancy ballrooms or the dining halls where rich passengers sipped champagne. This is where the real people worked, the ones nobody talked about in the newspapers. Cables are still floating with the current, dancing slowly like underwater grass. It's like time just stopped. The walls are stained with rust and something darker. The floor is covered with metal pieces, broken equipment, and structures that are falling apart bit by bit. Everything is covered in a thick layer of sediment that took 60 years to settle. The water is cold and dark, and when the camera light hits the walls, you can see scratches, dents, marks that tell stories nobody wrote down. This was where they lived their days. The workers who kept everything running, mechanics, engineers, cooks, cleaners, the people who made sure the rich folks upstairs had everything they needed. They worked in tight spaces, breathing recycled air, their hands covered in grease and sweat. While passengers danced above them, these men and women kept the engines roaring, the lights burning, the kitchens cooking. They were the invisible heart of the Andrea Doria, the ones who made the dream possible for everyone else. In the early morning hours when the ship went down, records show that some crew members were still moving through this corridor. They were doing their jobs, checking gauges, making sure everything was secure, but none of them were ever seen again. Their families waited at the docks, scanning the faces of survivors, holding photographs, asking anyone who would listen if they'd seen their son, their husband, their brother. But the answers never came. The corridor kept its secrets. What made this door impossible to reach for so long? Was it the current? A jammed lock? Or was it something nobody wants to talk about? Sometimes the hardest doors to open aren't locked with metal. They're locked with silence, with decisions made in panic, with truths too heavy to carry. When you look closely at the footage, you start seeing things, small things, things you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. At the back, almost invisible in the murk, there's a metal plate hanging at an angle. The writing on it has been worn away by salt and time, but you can still make out the shape of letters. Next to it, there's an emergency button. Red, or at least it used to be red. Now it's covered in algae and corrosion. And here's the thing that makes your skin crawl. It was never pressed. In all the chaos, in all the screaming and running and trying to survive, nobody hit that button. Did something go wrong here before the final impact? Was this corridor the last place to be evacuated, or was it forgotten in the rush to save the passengers up top? Think about it. When a ship is sinking and you only have minutes, who gets saved first? The people in first class with their jewelry and their names in the society pages, or the workers in the basement who nobody knows? There's something else in the recording. Listen carefully. A sound. It's quick, metallic, like something scraping against steel, like something moved right before the camera got there. Or maybe like someone moved. The audio experts cleaned it up, isolated it, played it over and over. They can't explain it. Old ships make noise, sure. Metal expands and contracts. Currents push things around. But this sound, it's different. It has a rhythm to it, almost like footsteps. Sometimes the biggest secrets aren't hidden where there's gold and diamonds and fancy paintings. They're hidden where there was fear, where people had to make choices no human should ever have to make, where someone decided who lived and who didn't, where someone sealed a door and walked away, knowing what they were leaving behind. The SS Andrea Doria still has compartments that have never been explored, rooms that haven't seen light since the night she sank, And maybe, just maybe, behind each locked door is a truth that we're not ready to face. Because opening a door doesn't just let light in, it lets the past out. And sometimes the past doesn't want to stay buried. Think about the crew member who was last in this corridor. Picture him checking the gauges one more time, making sure everything was ready for the night shift. He probably had a routine. Same thing every night. Check the pressure, listen for unusual sounds, make a note in the log. Maybe he was thinking about breakfast, or about his wife back home, or about the poker game later with the other engineers. Normal thoughts, human thoughts. And then, in an instant, everything changed. The collision happened at night. Most passengers were in their cabins, getting ready for bed or already asleep. But down here in the crew areas, people were working. The ship never slept, which meant the crew never really slept either. They worked in shifts, round the clock, keeping this massive vessel moving through the Atlantic. When the impact came, they felt it differently than the passengers did. They were closer to the hull, closer to the machinery. The sound would have been deafening. Metal tearing, rivets popping, water starting to rush in, and they would have known immediately that this was bad. The door we're talking about leads to a service corridor that connected the engine rooms to the crew quarters. It was a shortcut, a way for workers to move quickly between areas without going through the passenger sections. On a normal day, dozens of people would walk through here. But on that night, this corridor became something else. Maybe it became a trap. Maybe it became a choice. We don't know for sure because everyone who could tell us is gone. When divers first started exploring the Andrea Doria, they focused on the famous parts. The first-class dining room with its chandeliers still hanging from the ceiling. The promenade deck where you can still see deck chairs lined up like ghosts. The chapel where wedding rings and religious medals lie scattered on the altar. Those images made it into documentaries, into books, into museum exhibits. But nobody talked about the crew areas. Nobody thought they were interesting enough, important enough, tragic enough. But here's what they missed. The crew areas tell a different story. They tell the story of regular people doing an extraordinary job under impossible circumstances. When the ship started sinking, the crew didn't panic. They followed their training. They went to their stations. They helped passengers into lifeboats. They stayed calm even when everything around them was falling apart. And some of them, many of them, never made it out. The water in this corridor is especially dark. The silt is thicker here, disturbed less by currents because of how deep it sits in the wreck. When the camera moves through, it kicks up clouds that take minutes to settle. You can barely see 3 feet ahead. The divers who filmed this said it felt wrong, like the space didn't want to be recorded. One of them said he kept feeling like he needed to apologize, like he was intruding on something private, something sacred. There are personal items scattered throughout. A coffee mug, somehow still intact, sitting on a shelf as if someone just put it down for a second. A jacket hanging on a hook, the fabric long since rotted away but the buttons still there, still buttoned. A photograph in a frame, the image completely bleached by salt water, but you can still see the outline of 2 people standing together. Someone's family, someone's life. The further you go into the corridor, the more you realize this isn't just a hallway. It's a time capsule. It's a moment frozen forever. The moment when everything changed. The moment when normal became nightmare. The moment when people who were just doing their jobs became heroes or victims or both. Near the end of the corridor, there's another door, smaller than the first one. This one is partially open, wedged that way by a piece of debris. Through the gap, you can see what looks like a small room. Maybe a storage closet, maybe a break room. The camera tries to get a better angle, but the space is too tight. All you can see is a table, or what's left of one, and something on top of it. Something square. Maybe a book, maybe a logbook, maybe the answers everyone has been looking for. But getting to it would mean moving the debris, disturbing the wreck, potentially causing more damage. And there's a debate about that. Should we leave shipwrecks alone? Let them be the graves they've become? Or do we have a responsibility to uncover the truth, to tell the stories of the people who died there? It's not an easy question. Both sides have good points. Both sides care about honoring the dead. They just disagree on how to do it. What we do know is this. 51 people died when the Andrea Doria sank. That number could have been much higher. Over 1,700 people survived because the crew did their jobs perfectly. They lowered lifeboats in the dark, in rough seas, with the ship listing so badly that some boats couldn't even be launched. They kept the lights on as long as possible. They radioed for help and guided rescue ships to their location. They were professionals until the very end. But 51 people didn't make it. And we know the names of the passengers who died. We know their stories, where they were from, where they were going, who they left behind. But some of the crew members who died, we don't know as much about them. Their names are in the records, but their stories aren't. They weren't famous. They weren't wealthy. They were just workers. And in 1956, workers didn't always get the same attention as passengers. This corridor might be one of the last places some of them saw. These walls might have been the last thing they touched. That emergency button that was never pressed might have been their last hope. And now, 60 years later, we're finally looking, finally paying attention, finally asking what happened to the people who kept the ship running. The ocean is a strange place for memory. On land, we build monuments. We carve names in stone. We plant trees and put up plaques. We make sure people are remembered. But in the ocean, memory is different. The ocean doesn't care about monuments. It takes everything and makes it the same. Rich or poor, passenger or crew, everyone becomes part of the wreck. Everyone becomes part of the story that the ocean tells. But maybe that's fitting. Maybe that's the way it should be. Because on that night in 1956, when the ship was going down and people were fighting for their lives, none of that other stuff mattered. It didn't matter if you had a first-class ticket or if you were shoveling coal in the engine room. It didn't matter if you were wearing a tuxedo or coveralls. Everyone was just trying to survive. Everyone was just human. The door is open now. The corridor has been filmed. The images are out there. But in a way, the real door is still closed. The door to understanding what really happened. The door to knowing what those last moments were like for the people who didn't make it. That door might never fully open. Some things the ocean keeps forever. When you watch the footage, pay attention to the small details. The way the light catches on the rust. The way the cables move in the current. The way everything is covered in layers of life. Barnacles, algae, small fish making homes in the wreckage. The ocean doesn't see this as a tragedy. The ocean sees it as an opportunity. Life finds a way even in the darkest, coldest places. There's a moment in the video where the camera stops moving, just for a few seconds. It's pointed down the corridor toward the darkness at the end, and in that darkness, just for a frame or two, something seems to move. The analysts say it's probably just a fish, or sediment falling, or a trick of the light. But when you see it, your brain doesn't think fish. Your brain thinks person. Your brain thinks someone's down there. That's the power of this place. It makes you feel things that don't make logical sense. It makes you believe in ghosts, even if you never have before. Because how can a place hold that much sadness, that much fear, that much lost life and not leave some kind of mark? How can all those hopes and dreams and futures just disappear without leaving something behind? The families of the people who died deserve answers. They deserved them in 1956, and they deserve them now. Some of those families are still around. Children who lost parents, siblings who lost brothers and sisters. They're old now, but they still remember. They still wonder. They still hope that maybe somehow someone will find something that gives them closure. This video is a step toward that. Not a big step, maybe. Just opening one door, showing one corridor. But it's something. It's acknowledgement. It's saying that these spaces matter, these people mattered, their stories matter. Even if we never learn all the details, even if some questions never get answered, the act of looking is important. The act of caring is important. So here's what we're left with. A corridor at the bottom of the ocean, frozen in time, holding secrets it may never tell. A door that stayed closed for 60 years and is now open. Images that show us what was hidden. And questions, so many questions, that we may never fully answer. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the mystery is part of the memorial. Maybe not knowing everything is what keeps us coming back, keeps us thinking, keeps us remembering. Because as long as we're asking questions about the Andrea Doria, As long as we're exploring her corridors and documenting her decay, the people who died there aren't forgotten. They're still part of the conversation. They're still part of history. The ocean will eventually take the whole ship. One day, maybe 100 years from now, maybe 200, the Andrea Doria will collapse completely. The steel will corrode beyond recognition. The corridors will fill completely with sediment. The doors will rust away to nothing. And when that happens, all we'll have left are the images we captured, the stories we told, the memories we preserved. That's why this matters. That's why opening this door, filming this corridor, sharing these images is important. Because we're running out of time, the wreck is deteriorating. Every year it gets harder to explore, harder to document, harder to learn from. If we wait too long, if we decide the crew areas aren't worth exploring, aren't worth preserving, then those stories will be lost forever. And that would be a tragedy on top of a tragedy. The people who worked in these corridors, who died in these corridors, they deserve better than to be forgotten. They deserve to have their stories told, their sacrifices recognized, their humanity acknowledged. They were someone's child, someone's spouse, someone's friend. They had favorite foods and favorite songs and dreams for the future. They were real, and they mattered, and they still matter. So yes, the door is open. The corridor has been revealed. The images exist. But the work isn't done. There are more doors, more corridors, more stories waiting to be discovered. The Andrea Doria isn't finished teaching us. The ocean isn't finished sharing its secrets. And we aren't finished listening. Every shipwreck is a lesson about hubris, about nature's power, about human courage and human failure. The Andrea Doria teaches us all of that, but it also teaches us something else, that every person on a ship, from the captain to the lowest-ranking crew member, is part of the story, that everyone deserves to be remembered, that no life is too small, too ordinary, too forgotten to matter. This video is a dramatization inspired by real records from the sinking of the Andrea Doria. The specific events described are fictional and serve narrative and educational purposes. But the emotion behind them is real. The respect for the people who died is real. The desire to uncover truth and preserve memory is real. If you're drawn to stories that reveal what time tried to erase, if you believe that every door from the past deserves to be opened with care and respect, then stay with us. There are more doors to open, more corridors to explore, more truths waiting in the darkness. The ocean is deep and its secrets are many, but together we can bring some of them into the light where they belong.